Hey, hey, Fabiola, I have a question.
What?
Do you think we're going to hell? Do you
This
think?
was your really dumb opening bit.
Yes,
Your idea that you just proposed.
yes. Do are we bad girls? Are we going to hell?
Maybe.
I didn't even know what this film was about, but I saw that title and it was like, well, are we the bad girls in question?
I mean, it's fitting considering the title came first and then the
Yeah,
plot.
yeah. Actually having now seen what the plot is, I'm like, the title doesn't really fit, but it sells, I guess. It's intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the reviews were like, she did nothing wrong.
Yeah. But I think that's kind of the point.
Yeah. Also, like in a very literal sense, considering the twist, but also maybe
Mm.
not.
Yeah, I mean, here's the other question. Is hell just New York City? She goes to New York City, so maybe that's hell. And certainly it's not a pleasant experience, really.
I mean, this was back when New York had the reputation of being dangerous.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
Do you want an opening where I don't immediately mention what the title or what film we're talking about today?
at a, I don't know.
Okay. Let's just talk
Yeah,
about this because I'm
I feel like we've already started, and I
yo
don't want to do like an editing Frankenstein thing.
real. So, Fabiola, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about the Doris Wishman classic Bad Girls Go to Hell from 1965.
This was the first Doris Wishman film I've seen.
I think
Um,
same.
and now I've learned a bit about her. And at Scarecrow Video, where I checked out this film, they have a whole section that is sexploitation. I sent you a photo. We should
Yeah,
post that on our Instagram
yeah.
because honestly, like,
And a video of an entire Doris Wishman section.
yeah, yeah, and every disc has like multiple of her films on it, pretty much. So I just watched this because I wanted to focus on, this one storyline for our discussion. But I have five other films that I brought with me that I'm planning on watching this week. Because, yes, Doris Wishman is a really, like, I'm so glad we get to talk about her because female director in the exploitation industry, and like a prolific one at that.
Yeah. I think I heard that she might have been like the most prolific female director of the sound era, period.
Whoa. I mean, I don't know. I don't know those stats, but yeah. You put this on our list because you saw someone wearing a Doris Wishman shirt. Is that right?
I feel like it was a mixture of a bunch of things. Like we've definitely gotten requests for Doris Wishman films.
Yeah.
And there's also the clip of her on Conan that shows up every once in a while on the Twitter timeline,
Wait,
which
I
is
don't
really
know this
fun.
clip.
Yeah, like a few months before she passed, she was on Conan with Roger Ebert. And so
Oh,
it's really fun to like watch her interact with them. And
yeah.
Conan is just being really awkward. Meanwhile, Roger Ebert is like asking questions about film.
Yeah. I mean, Ebert was a bit of a freak too.
Yeah, literally one of the things he says was like, how come we never saw Chesty Morgan naked?
I mean, that is something that
He was literally
was
like, Doris, I am upset.
I I mean, I'm really because so this is a film. She worked with Chesty Morgan a lot, but this is a film that Chesty Morgan isn't in.
No.
That could be an episode for a future season potentially. This is such I'm like so excited to talk about this film because it's got layers.
Yeah, it's got a bunch of layers in the sense that, like, you can argue that the film is layered, but also in the way of talking about it having layers has layers.
Oh, okay, wait. What do you mean by talking about it having layers has layers?
I think this might have been like partially influenced by like at least what I saw of the documentary that you also watched, because
Mm-hmm.
there's a part where they're talking about like how much of what people interpret from these exploitation films actually intentional, and Roger
Yeah.
Corman says that part of it is not, but part of it is definitely coming from a subconscious place of the
Yeah.
filmmaker.
So yes, this documentary it's called Schlock exclamation point. And then the subtitle is like the secret history of American cinema, I think. It's basically talking about exploitation films and it was a really like solid
And how they
documentary.
basically saved the film industry.
Yeah. Well, and that it's like basically the thesis of the film seems to be, hey, this is so much of like art house cinema, all these complex themes were explored actually first in mass market low budget exploitation films, and it kind of is very much making the case for like, hey, even if it's just like they're doing it to make a movie and to make a money and to like appeal to the audience, like, you know, an audience of men go mostly going into these, you know, theaters to see nudes.
And
um
they made them in under a week, and they started with the title and a poster first,
yeah, and they
and the
had like,
script was just like write whatever comes to your mind.
yeah, and basically how all of that is like that is so important for the film industry basically, and for the creative industry, because also like, you know, they make the case that like producers fighting to have these films not be censored, that's, you know, work that protects all creative freedom, you know, all creative expression. But yeah, I did find that Roger Corman quote really interesting, where he's basically like, yeah, some of it might be conscious, some of it's subconscious. And the narrator of the film, the filmmaker Ray Greene, is definitely kind of was proposing these questions without like really, he was kind of saying his thoughts but also being like, hey, what do you think? Do you think a film where the filmmakers maybe didn't even intend for there to be these themes like can still be meaningful? And in the context of camp, yeah, I think so, because that's the whole, I mean, that's the whole process of engaging with camp media, is to be like, what is the meaning here? I'm going to make my own meaning out of this, at least how I engage with it.
Yeah, and in regards to the layers thing, like in a way, analyzing exploitation film is camp, because it
Mm-hmm.
is like taking seriously the unserious.
Yeah. That's a really good articulation, that it's like we're not just saying that the film on its own is camp. It's because we are engaging with it. It's a kind of like it can't like we are in some ways like camping
Yeah.
because it's yeah, it's almost like this like, you know, it's a kind of like, okay, we're doing this like it's not a performance. I like do think it's like I do take this seriously, but yeah, it's completely like we're sitting down for this moment and we're gonna be serious about this thing that is, what was it actually ever that serious?
Yeah.
um
Anyways, the unserious thing we're going to be talking about is Bad Girls Go to Hell from 1965. And it's the plot is basically vibes. And just like
Yeah.
this, it's like a really surreal film
Yes.
for various reasons, but it's basically about this woman named Meg who the morning after her husband leaves for like a work thing, she's like taking out the trash or she gets assaulted by this guy, and then he threatens her, and then she gets assaulted by him again, but this time she kills him with an ashtray.
Yep.
So in panic and desperation, she flees Boston, because this apparently starts in Boston,
Yep.
and moves to New York. And it's basically a string of these kind of purposely repetitive scenes where she's like crashing in someone's house, but then that person assaults her, so she has to like get her two suitcases and go to another place over and over.
Yeah.
And like all these places, I'm pretty sure are like two different apartments redressed over and
Yeah.
over, which adds to the surrealism because it's like very deja vu. We've
Well,
been here before.
and the way it's shot too, it's all in black and white film. It's honestly a gorgeous
Yeah.
cinematography. We'll get into
A
it
lot
later,
of it
but
is very handheld.
yeah, there's some shots that I'm like, even though it's this moment of like violence, I'm like, whoa.
Some people have compared it to Maya Daren's Meshes of the Afternoon.
Oh, I haven't seen that, but I think that's on my list.
It's like way shorter, but it's still basically this really repetitive experimental film about this woman who is like getting threatened by this figure, and there's a lot of like random shots of objects in her
Mm-hmm.
home, and there's also like a lot of handheld.
And all of the dialogue's dubbed, which is really, and like it was clearly some of the lines they knew when they were filming, but a lot of shots like there'll be someone speaking like in voiceover and the person's mouth isn't moving, or it's like from them from behind. They really like kind of just came up with the script after the fact, I guess. Like, so it's
Yeah, I
all,
mean, I was mainly talking about Meshes in the Afternoon, which
oh,
is telling of like the comparison.
oh, you were saying the one with like the film that there's a woman and it's just like
Yeah,
cuts to random sequences is Messages from the Afternoon?
yeah.
Oh, I thought you were still talking. Oh,
No,
okay.
I was talking about Meshes in the Afternoon, which this film gets compared to.
Yeah, no,
And
I
that
can
one is
see.
like a properly art house, iconic
Yeah.
women's film.
That was the point that was being made by Schlock. The documentary was their comparison was Agony of Love, which was a 1966 sexploitation film, and they compared that to Belle de Jour, which is
Mm,
like very classic, it's like,
yeah,
I haven't seen it yet, but everyone talks about like
it's
this.
good.
But
Yeah, it's
that
good.
Agony of Love came out a year before, and they're both about like women who become like are exploring like sex work and their desires and like fantasies. And it's I think it's like really interesting to look at how there's so many films. Like I think I kind of talked about this when we were talking about Stephanie Rothman and the student nurses, where it was like, what is the distinction? Like, how much of what makes an exploitation film is marketing or like its production history? Because there are certain ways that things are categorized that when you actually are looking at the plot or the style between like a exploitation film and an art house film, they're very nearly the same, but they get like talked about differently because they kind of were created in different ways. I don't know. It's really
Yeah.
interesting.
I do feel like there are different categories of exploitation film, like depending on like was it a really short shoot? Was it like
Hmm.
heavily marketed a certain way? Is it about certain topics?
Yeah. I mean, but I think, is it about certain topics? It's like,
But like, does it like specifically really push certain topics?
yeah, that's fair. And also, like, for me, I do think it's relevant to have that distinction because, like, whether some a film was made from a title first and we're just like, okay, we're shooting this on a shoestring budget in a couple days so we could just churn out as many as possible, versus like somewhat like an auteur taking their time. Like, I do think that is an important distinction, but I think bringing up the similarities, for me, my point with that is to try to be like, these both have value. They
Yeah,
both are interesting texts to engage with. And because, yeah, I think for me, I want to get into the specifics of Bad Girls Go to Hell soon, but I just wanted to say, like, after watching this film and watching then the Schlock documentary, I'm very much coming away with this kind of perspective, as someone who in the past who's been like, why would you make something just for audience appeal? Like, why are you trying to, like, that's ruining your artistic vision if you're just trying to like sell something to a mass market. Now I'm like, okay, no, like, get off your high horse a little bit. Like, you can absolutely sell something for mass appeal, mass market appeal, and there still be something interesting and like engaging in that.
yeah. And back to your comment about sound, like considering the constant soundtrack on this film, I'm pretty sure there was like
Oh my
no
god.
on-set sound recording. I'm pretty sure everything we hear was recorded after they wrapped.
Yeah. So, yeah, okay. Bad Girls Go to Hell has this like really kind of soft jazz. Like, what
It
would you
depends
call
on
it?
the
Like,
scene, because in some of it it's like this really fun jazz. Some of it is soft jazz. Some of it is like surf rock
yeah.
jazz, but it's constant throughout the film, which makes certain scenes really funny to me.
I thought it was just weird. I was like, you're losing me. There was this, but when she like
But that
moves,
was the vibe of this genre. It's
yeah.
supposed to be fun.
I like, if there's like a jazz band and I'm watching people play music live, I'm like, this is so cool. But when I'm just listening to it
It's like a
with
music video.
yeah, but it's to setting to Ducks in the Park, like Central Park is like, huh? Okay. But it, like, that's like the absurdity almost of, in this like kind of like weird, like disjointed, you're watching these women, this women deal with all these different relationships and then cut to things that really seem out of place. Like, that to me absolutely heightens
She's
the
like
camp
crying
factor.
to fun jazz music. She's taking out the trash to jazz music.
She's also taking out the trash in like a sheer like
Yeah.
lacy dress.
Yeah.
We should say what ends up being the twist of this film.
So basically, like 3 minutes before the film ends, and after we've like seen her be put through hell in like the same situation over and over again, the police are after her just when we think she's like found a solid place to stay taking care of this older woman. She's like, oh, my son, he's like investigating this really interesting case of this woman who killed this guy and is on the run, and he has photos and fingerprints and he's getting close.
Yeah.
And then like he comes through the closet door that they're pretending is an actual door to an apartment. And like
Yeah.
he kind of attacks her and arrests her. And then she wakes up at the beginning of the movie and her husband's like, what's wrong? And she's like, oh, it's a dream. But then she does all the things that she did at the beginning of the movie, and the movie completely ends with the first assault.
I will say, I actually knew going into the film because I like thought I saw something on the Wikipedia page about it being like a dream sequence. So I was kind of like, is this what's happening? And you had also told me you were like, oh, there's a really great twist.
I
Um,
only like knew that there was going to be a twist. I didn't know what exactly it was going to be. So when it happened, I was cheering. Like, not necessarily because none of this actually happened to her, but because now it's suddenly a film about her contending with her having these thoughts and kind of being jolted back into this like domestic reality that she was kind of not living in the
yeah.
dream.
Yeah, I think it's really, really I mean, this is a film to the fact that it is a dream, even though it's a dream where she's like, when she wakes up, she's like, it was horrible, it was horrible. There's makes the events of the film feel a little more like there's a bit more agency to them,
Yeah.
or at least like it feels different than just having like watching. Yes, we are watching this woman be attacked and raped over and over again, but there is the meta context of it's a female director and screenwriter because
Yeah.
she wrote it too, right? Even though it was like under a pen name or something, it was not. It like said Dawn something, but it was
But
just
it's
Doris for
her.
both. Yeah.
And like the way the film is shot as well is like classic sexploitation.
Well, because it's not like there's actually very little nudity, and there's like
Yeah.
almost
But still the way the camera looks at the women in the film
yeah.
is still.
But yeah, it's like because it. I don't know. There's something about within the narrative, it just being a dream. It's being something that's like imagined and thought about. It like makes the meta context of this is a story that a woman is like telling us. It like literalizes it in some way. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, and that's also why I thought the comment that Roger Corman made in the documentary really interesting because he's like, yeah, some of this is very much coming from a subconscious place. And a lot of
Mm.
the writing for these films is like very immediate and whatever comes to your mind first. And so, like, what does that say about this film? That, like, all of this is what's coming to mind first.
Yeah. I saw a Letterboxd review, or maybe one or two actually, that compared this to In the Cut. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it yet, but I hear it's really good.
It's really good. It's a erotic thriller from the early aughts. I think it's Jane Campion. Oh my God, I'm suddenly like,
Possibly. I
like
know
sh
Mark Ruffalo is in it.
yes. Oh my God, and
I know it's the one with Mark Ruffalo.
he's really hot. Yes, it is Jane Campion. Okay, I got that right. Whew. But yeah, that is a really really interesting erotic thriller because it's like it's definitely about women's desire, but also like the way I summed it up when I watched it was that it's like it shows how men are something to both men are to be desired and to be feared in equal measure, and like part of the fear is what makes them thrilling. And I'd also say that this movie is a lot like Romance
Yeah.
by Catherine Breillat. Breillat.
Briat.
Briat. Let me say that again. Catherine Briat?
I think so.
I'm so sorry to
Except
all the
the
French
content
people.
of Romance is way more graphic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like but that's like more of an art house. Like,
Yeah. The themes are pretty similar, but the way it's constructed is different.
yes.
Which is also kind of what
It's
makes this film so interesting is how this was made in the mid 60s, but a lot of what this film is dealing with, or we can read into that it's dealing with, is something that films still from the 90s and early 2000s and now we're still like heavily considering and like are also especially still considered taboo and like quote unquote
mm-hmm.
problematic.
Well, because I it is a fact of living in being raised and socialized and being in a femme presenting body that you could be attacked and you could be violated. And I think like there is not like it's, as you said, it's taboo, so it's kind of like hard to do quite research, on it. But there is a fair amount of women and people of all identities who process that and recontextualize it into with desire,
Yeah.
consensual, non-consensual,
Yeah.
consensual, non-consent. Like rape fantasy is absolutely a thing.
And this movie from 1965 was doing that. And I feel like that's one of the main reasons it's like so fondly remembered
Yeah.
by scholars. And like that's also one of the reasons why it's very like a woman made this, so it's okay. But also you wouldn't quite tell that a woman made it
Oh,
because of the way it's like shot and with because it's within this genre, so it does this kind of camp thing of like it's heavily gendered, but the gender lines are also thoroughly blurred
yeah.
at
I
the same
mean,
time.
there's actually a moment in the film where in the not the film Bad Girls Go to Hell, in the documentary I should say, that where Wishman is asked like if she thinks people can tell that her films are made by a woman, and she's like, I don't think so. Do you think it looks like it's made by a woman? Like, and I'm like, yeah, I don't. I mean, to be fair, I haven't seen a lot of these. So, did you do research on the specific subgenre, like the roughies, is what they're called?
Not as much, but I like do know exploitation imagery when I see it, and like it's
Yeah,
very like you said, it's like heavily marketed towards the young male demographics, so it's definitely shot a certain way.
yeah, because the later part of the documentary goes into talking about like the roughies, which is like, there's the nudies,
Yeah.
the nudie cutie, like all these kinds of like
Yeah.
styles of sexploitation films, and the roughies,
And Doris
like,
kind of did all of them.
yeah, well, she started with doing like just nudist
Yeah.
films, which weren't even like sexual. They were like,
Yeah, the way they were able to make them and distribute them was to argue that, oh, these are documentaries, like this is a thing that exists, therefore it's not a crime
yeah,
to film it. Like that was what they argued in court.
yeah. But yeah, there was a film historian in the documentary who said that his theory of kind of why the roughies like kind of became this popular like subgenre of like where there was a showing of these violence and these kind of, because there was, even in sexploitation films, there was a fear of censorship for showing, of showing too much sex. And so his theory was that the roughies, they could still show physicality and the action of the body. It was with violent sex, basically. And but like we don't even really see, like in this film
Yeah.
we don't see penetration. We don't
It's just a
see,
lot of shaky cam POV shots
Well,
set to
reaction
loud
shots.
jazz music and
Like
random cuts to random objects in the room.
it's like we see the backs of people. It's usually the men who are like assaulting her. We see their backs. They're usually fully clothed. And then we'll see her face like twisting, and like maybe like there's a couple times where she is like partially naked, but we don't really see much of her. We'll see like her underwear being pulled off, and that feels like very violating, and but also like yeah, there's this like eroticism to that
Yeah,
as well.
like it definitely lingers on those
Yeah.
moments.
But I honestly think, is it fair to say that the scenes that almost feel the most like that have the most nudity are when she's Meg is staying with Della,
Possibly.
and it's
Also, like
not,
in the opening when she's like waking up.
yeah, where it's like, but it's not a sexual nudity. It's a, we're sitting in our underwear, or we're like undressing and we're putting on a new pair of clothes, and it feels very like comfortable, which is a weird word to use in terms of this film, but like
Yeah, I also feel like within the context of the genre and with the handheld camera, there is like a sense of voyeurism to those scenes still.
that's fair.
Like those
Yeah.
scenes aren't necessarily there to like show to only show like their regular daily lives. They're also there to show this woman and to market it to
Yeah.
mass audiences.
No, I mean, I think that is true, because it's like, as I pointed out earlier, it's like why would you be cleaning your house in like like barely wearing anything? What? Like it's nudity for nudity's sake.
And like one of the random dreamlike scenes that at least is like dreamlike to me was when she was showing Della like, oh, I can do acrobatics.
Yeah.
And it's just like her doing acrobatics, and it's like one of those situations in dreams where like something just happens and you just watch and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
What do you do for a living? Oh, why, I'm a dancer, an acrobatic dancer. Watch. Say, you're really good. You shouldn't have any trouble getting a job. I thank you. Hey, did I say something wrong?
But okay, I of course, I want to talk about one of the sexual relationships that she has is with this woman, where she
Yeah.
gets this room, and it's so it like that to me is so fascinating, because it's very like there is this, it's like this woman on the street is like, "Oh, hey, do you need a room? I have a cousin who needs a roommate. Come to this place." It's very like surreal. And the camera is like absolutely like panning over Della's body and like lingering on her. And she's giving kind of these looks to Meg. And oh, she has that line where she's like, "You'll earn your keep." And there's this tension between them. And so Della eventually like comes to her bed and is like, when it seems like Meg's like sleeping, but then she like wakes up or opens her eyes and rolls over, and they start kissing. And it's the only time outside of her husband in the beginning where she's not protesting.
Yeah, I feel like at first she refuses, but then she like goes in on her own terms. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely like along with her husband, it's definitely like the least violent interaction that she has.
Well, and then later she like after that she like packs up her bag and once again is gonna leave. And Della's like, you know that I love you. And she says, I love you too. That's why I must go.
Yeah, and I feel like that line is very, like, it encompasses a lot of what this film is and is trying to maybe subconsciously reconcile, which is like,
Mm,
it's this sense of, I love you, but I shouldn't love you.
yeah. Yeah. And like that is so in the kinds of love that that's tied to, it's all these things that are taboo. It's all of this like it's homosexuality. It's going like she at the like with this janitor guy who's mopping the stairs at the very beginning. He absolutely like assaults her. He like comes onto her and it's really, it's violent and uncomfortable. And then he like asks her to come back to his apartment again. And she goes.
Yeah,
Like,
because
yeah,
he
there's
sends her a note that's like, if you don't come to my apartment, I'll tell your husband.
yeah, but it's like she worries like, oh, like maybe he'll think my husband will think that I like went willingly.
Yeah.
And yeah, like yeah, she was being coerced, but it's weird. It's
Yeah.
weirdly
That's the vibe of this movie. It's weird.
yeah. There's a review from that I found. I don't know if you it was because you had liked it or maybe I had someone else that I followed had liked it. A Letterboxd review by Scumbalina, who I'm pretty sure is actually a filmmaker themselves. They had a quote that was like, oh, this is a really good point. In their review, we're saying something that's always present in these early roughies is shame. Women's shame, to be exact. Shame is what guides our leading lady through all her decisions, thinking she doesn't deserve better. And then later, even her one pleasant sexual experience with a woman was something to be ashamed of.
Yeah. Like, as much as this film is scenes of her going through this exact same experience over and over again, there's also a bunch of scenes where she's just like ruminating about her situation and crying and like looking very alone. And when
Yeah.
you like hear her voiceover and her thought process.
And also, like, the fact that she's being, like, tailed or, like, threatened with this by this legal case or, this manhunt to find her because she murdered this guy. Yeah, there's, like, that, like, fear and shame and when you would think the like kind of like person who if you're someone who like cares about justice you would like be like there's nothing to be ashamed of if you were raped like that's that's the person who did this to you, they're the one who should be like face consequences, but no, like there are consequences for women who come forward for things that they didn't consent to
Especially
too.
in the mid 60s.
But even
Women
now,
didn't have credit cards.
yeah, no, that's true. I mean, it's so, and she, like, she had to run away and had no money. She has to, like, this character, has, like, is totally helpless pretty much on her own. And that's not to say that she's not, like helpless, like, oh, she can't, but, like, literally, like, she doesn't have the infrastructure,
Yeah.
She was dependent on her husband. And, like, the only like when she's trying to find a job and stuff she can't find it. The only like the best job she finds is this like caretaker job for this
Yeah.
woman. It's a film where I'm like I mean this is the messy thing about exploitation films. I'm like, is it trying to say something,
Yeah.
or is it
Yeah.
just presenting all of these scenes for us to deal with however we want?
I feel like it's definitely a mixture of both. And I was just looking at my little screenshots, and one of my sources is
Oh
from
yeah.
this Metrograph article, and this paragraph just is their description of Bad Girls Go to Hell. And they write, Bad Girl sits somewhere between a nightmare and a fantasy for the middle class woman at its center. Wishman and her DCP and longtime collaborator C. Davis Smith's camera leave unclear whether these dreams of perpetual sexual violence are born out of terror or yearning. At its most memorable moment, Darlene clumps around a mid-century lounge chair as if possessed, legs quivering and hair sprawled in tendrils. After 5 years of delivering cheeky sex dramas, Wishman in Bad Girls disrupts the lust of men in its world and its presumed audience. During scenes of sexual assault, the camera will stay pinned on the faces of aggressors for uncomfortably long stretches, their skin twitching at the corners of thoughtless, grotesque faces. It is a horrifying and exhilarating motion picture, transgressive even by contemporary standards. There is no actual nudity or unsimulated sex in the film, though it is undeniably pornographic in its taboo busting and the copious number of scenes with the explicit and sole purpose of arousal.
Yeah. You know what I want to ask you is how did this film make you feel? Like not what you think it means or trying to parse it logically. Like what was your emotional reaction to watching this?
That's an interesting question because I feel like I process feelings a lot by like intellectualizing them.
Mm.
Like it's kind of an automatic process for me,
Oh,
but like still
yeah.
like my immediate feeling was that like this is kind of what it feels like to reconcile being a woman filmmaker who is invested in this genre.
Mm.
Like the film itself is very emotional and in a way, whether intentional or unintentional, is this form of processing of
Yeah.
emotion itself.
You said that you got like really excited at the twist. Like what was that excitement because that like processing seemed realized to you or
Yeah, it seemed both like an acknowledgement of the processing and the fantasy inherent in exploitation film,
mm.
but it also in a way made the film smarter in the sense that it was no longer just a women are treated horribly movie.
Yeah.
It's a women are treated horribly, but how might we internalize it? Might we feel about it? How is this dream world different or similar from the real world that Meg was inhabiting?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing I think to me, because I knew I was like, okay, I think as I was watching this, I was like, I think this is all a dream or a fantasy. So I was like, okay, like contending with like she's processing this. What to me, what the emotion that I had at the end, where I was like, and I immediately texted you being like, I don't know how I feel about this,
Yeah.
but I can say how I think what I was feeling was sadness because she comes out of this dream and then actually experiences this violence. And it was like shocking, I guess, because I was like, "Oh, if this is all in a dream. This is all escape. This isn't real." And then the ending is like, "No, this is real."
It is real, but it's also her going through the exact same motions that she did during the dream. So I feel like there's a question of what, like whether she remembers those exact things or not from waking up.
Like,
So
do you
there's
think
an
she
ambiguity there as well.
it's like, do you think like, oh, because of this dream, she would be able to be okay with like it actually happening?
Like not necessarily that, but maybe in a way like subconsciously replicating everything
Mm,
that led to that moment in the dream.
yeah. You know what it is? It was an ending that left me without. catharsis, kind of. And like this season we've been talking about like the kind of the brutal reality of, you know, a violent world, like with Showgirls, with the Doom Generation. But both of those films actually end with the characters driving off. Like it gives us,
Yeah.
after this moment of violence, it gives us a beat for to see the characters processing it. But like this is a film that is like, it does it flipped in some ways. All of the processing happens before that violent act at the end. And so then I'm like, oh, like suddenly I have to do the work to like, I guess, process this final rape by like thinking about the entire film that came before it, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like definitely one of the main ways I interpret the film is that like it itself is sort of Doris subconsciously and maybe a bit consciously processing like all her ideas as a filmmaker and like her own experience as a woman in the mid 60s.
Mm.
Like I definitely kind of see Meg in her in a way, with like this like sort of push and pull of being drawn to this imagery and subject matter while also being ashamed of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like Doris's passion. Like she started working on film like as like a hobby, and it was after her husband passed away and she like wanted to have something to do with her life.
Yeah.
And so I just find it like really relatable as like a filmmaker with similar interests. And like this is something that is
Yeah.
very much active in my brain, and like here's a movie presenting all of that and also in some way wrestling with it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm drawn to these themes too, but I think a little there's other stuff I'm more interested in exploring in my work as a filmmaker.
Yeah, same. But like the general vibe.
Yeah. I do find it really interesting that another reason I think this is film is an interesting comparison to romance is they both almost like explore the constraints of what being like a happy stable couple are,
Yeah.
like in very different ways, because romance is about, you know, this woman who like really wants to have sex and her boyfriend is like, no, I don't see you like that, and she's like, that,
Her boyfriend is so weird.
yeah. and in this film it's like, oh, this charming, you know, this charming couple, and they're just like, it's very like kind of like seems very domestic bliss, but
But like there still is like a level of rejection towards
yeah,
her, but like
because
it's not that intense, it's just subtle.
it's very subtle, but I still like, I absolutely picked up on this beginning where she's like, she wants to fuck, okay, like eh, she's looking at him, she's like, they get in the shower together, but she just kind of like ends up just kind of like giving him a little kiss on the back. Like we don't see anything happen. Like there's absolutely this desire that she has, and it's so interesting that it's like, okay, she doesn't get this fulfillment from that relationship, that she doesn't get a physical, I mean like a physical release through sex with her husband. So then that's what, from that is kind of is what this dream or this like exploration comes out of, where she's not able to have, she doesn't get the sex with her husband, and so instead all like almost every man she interacts with seems to want to like have sex with her. Like it's, I I don't know how, again, I'm like, how intentional is it, but I'm absolutely reading there, in it there is some sort of anxiety and frustration with kind of the just ideal, heterosexual married couple.
Yeah, I also feel like in one of the macro ways that this film affected me is that it's kind of also wrestling with like what women's filmmaking is or can be or
Mm.
what it looks like. Because I feel like definitely nowadays there's this certain idea of like what a film made by a woman looks like. And it's
Mm.
definitely not this.
Yeah.
And like this is kind of what we're like subtly discouraged from doing because that's quote unquote how men make film.
Oh my God. Yeah. You know what this is reminding me of? Of the bodies, bodies, bodies discourse,
Oh yeah.
where, there was that one.
And also maybe the substance. I haven't watched it in full, but I know the substance is
The
discourse.
substance is even more,
Yeah.
even more overt sexualization, but just like women having boobs and looking hot, and the camera following that is something that, like, yeah, there is definitely a certain kind of audience that is really like get all upset about it.
And it's weirdly predominantly women
Mm-hmm.
who get upset about that.
I mean, God, it's like,
And like in regards to the substance, I feel like a lot of that imagery, it's argued as like, oh, it's supposed to be commentary. Like that's the point. It's supposed to be about how the imagery is bad. But like, is it only
I mean,
that?
you certainly can't make that case for that for Bad Girls Go to Hell,
Yeah.
because it's like, no, the point of shooting stuff like shooting it voyeuristically, like shoot like being like, yeah, we're gonna have nudity and the camera is gonna like pan over these women's bodies. We're doing that because that sells. And that's it. Like that's kind of like that's why
Yeah.
and
Which is exactly why it's like the kind of film that like women are quote unquote not supposed to make or are discouraged from making.
when it's like, we live in a capitalist society. I
And
know.
also fictional images are fictional images.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Because I'm like, okay, people are gonna make this kind of like, if we make films like this because they do well and we want to make a living as a filmmaker, then there's nothing wrong with that, because like that's just society. But then, okay, somehow if we're living in a completely like communist, everyone is like has all of the funding, and they're like, you can just make what you want to make and you don't have to stress about that impacting your livelihood. Even then, you can just
Yeah, I'd
shoot
still do
sex.
that.
Yeah,
I don't care.
because it's not only, why does sex sell? Because we have a desire to see it.
Yeah.
We have like, humans are interested in our own bodies and other people's bodies, how it looks. Like that is
Yeah.
like, not, I'm
And
not saying
that's
that
kind of like
everyone.
why it's like weirdly in a contradictory sense to me in terms of like intellectualizing this film, but like that's why it's like weird and kind of disingenuous to me when people immediately intellectualize certain depictions of characters as this is supposed to be commenting
Mm-hmm.
on it. There's like this knee-jerk reaction for it to be something more
Yeah.
than what it's presented, because what does it say about ourselves when it's not something more than what it's presented?
It is still incredibly transgressive and radical to be confident and open about being a sexual being.
Yeah.
And like that's why I want to make erotic thrillers.
Yeah. Same.
Because I find them fun.
Yeah.
That's all it needs to be. And I, especially as a queer person, I enjoy looking at women's bodies. And I want to be like I want to just do that. I want to like explore that. Obviously, I'm going to have safe practice and like it'll be in an environment where everyone's comfortable and safe and consent. But like when you're also telling that story and then you're showing it, people who are showing up to the movie theater or watching it on, you know, watching that media in whatever way, that they're also consenting to engage with that. They're engaging with it because they want to, you know, they want to see that. And like, if you don't want to see it, that's fine. But don't overthink or restrict people who do.
Yeah, and this film, like, maybe to start wrapping up the conversation, which would take like another 30 minutes probably. Like one of the things that like this film and the exploitation genre as a whole like really reminded me of is just like thinking about the value of art now.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like was thinking back to a party I went to over the summer that was like basically all of my, not all of it, but like it all consisted of my grad school cohort. And one of the things I remember that was being discussed was someone was saying that like we shouldn't be having like these incredible stressful moments or like breakdowns or high or think this is so high stakes because we're just making movies. It's supposed to be fun. We're supposed to be just having fun with our friends and peers. It's not heart surgery. The point is to just have fun.
Yeah.
And like in relation to that, I feel like quote unquote problematic art is more important now than ever, not to sound 2016.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'm trying to figure out how to articulate is that yes, it's fun. It doesn't need to be high stakes. But in some way, I think with the current political climate, it is high stakes because there is you know, legislature that is being proposed that will be restricting of not just actual like healthcare related to like sexual health, but restriction of pornography and expressions of sexuality in media. And so it's high stakes.
And then the MPA was like congratulating Trump on like his presumptive election nomination, which was weird. Partly because I don't think that they've ever done that for an election before.
Yeah. This is the one they decided to comment on. Fascism.
Yeah.
But what I want to say, I guess, is that like we can have fun not despite the seriousness and high stakes. And not like in spite of. It's just I think holding both of those true at the same time.
Yeah.
Because having fun is in itself like living an authentic life is itself and can be a revolutionary act. And that's not to make it scary and stressful. It's just to make it even more like this is what we're going to do. This is how I'm going to live. This is what I'm going to tell stories about.
Yeah, and I feel like that's one of the ways and reasons like this film and like the genre as a whole is like impactful to me, since it's like Doris is just at least it seems to me she's just having fun with these images. And like that itself is just kind of provocative and quote unquote unexpected because she's a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honestly, I do think though, I know it was the 60s, I know it's the style. Could have had even more blood and tits.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of, I feel like in this the spirit of the film and like how like as you were saying, like quoting that review, like a lot of it seems to be about contending with shame, even though this is like at face value a very unashamed movie. Like I
Mm.
wrote down in one of my notes, something for me personally is reconciling the need to justify my tastes versus knowing that my tastes are and are designed to be niche.
Yeah. I saw something on Twitter recently. Maybe it was because you had retweeted it about someone was like talking about like all of the look at all these horror performances that probably aren't going to get Oscar nominations. And it was someone quote tweeted it being like, I think, like horror fans might need to contend with the fact that like if they are really invested in like this like niche genre, you're not going to win awards, at least the big name Oscar awards, And that's okay. That's part of what is actually like exciting about these kinds of films, you know?
Yeah. And like one of the interesting things about this season is how we're releasing the episodes as we're also editing and recording them, which
Mm-hmm.
means I like get maybe close to real-time responses and like my weekly calls with my parents.
Oh.
And like my dad's been like, why do you watch so many horror movies? I never expected that you'd be like the kind of person to watch so many horror movies. And like that kind of jarred me a bit,
Huh.
especially considering how horror is like an incredibly popular genre
Yeah.
right
Did I
now.
did I tell you that we had my dad had a bit of that with my mom? Which I'm like,
Oh,
they've known each other for so long, but it wasn't even, we watched Shallow Grave, which isn't a horror movie, it's a thriller. Very good movie, by the way. But he kind of commented on, because I had it on my watch list and my mom had it on her watch list. So we were like, oh, do you want to watch that? Let's watch this. We both want to watch this. And my dad was kind of like, oh, he like mentioned like after the fact that he was like, yeah, I was kind of surprised that like that be the kind of thing that you want to see. Like that sounds like it would be really violent and brutal. And I mean, it ends up it's about these roommates who they don't kill someone, but someone dies, and then they have to like they're trying to hide the body, and so it's not like super gory and graphic, but it's like intense. Um, but yeah, my dad was kind of like, oh, I was surprised. Like he knows that I like horror, but to my mom, he was like, I wouldn't think that you would want to watch something like that. And I was like, no, that makes sense. I know my mom like she stopped watching horror movies like around the time I my sister and I were born because she was busy being a caretaker and couldn't go and see stuff, but also just like it kind of changed, She's like, yeah, it kind of changed being a mom and encountering things that are, horrifying, especially when it was early 2000s and like height of torture porn, where it was very much
yeah.
just about like shock. That wasn't
And
what you
that's
want to
kind of
see.
back in a way.
It is. But now she's like yeah, she does like watching stuff. Like she would go, I mean, so much stuff when she was in high school in her 20s and stuff. And there's a lot of films that she like I'll ask her about and she'll know. And she's like she's seen, and that's ranging from, big name popular stuff and art house stuff, and less of, she's seen less of like the low budget things. But I don't know, I do think it's, I don't, my dad wasn't like shaming her, but he was just kind of like surprised and maybe a little bit of a recontextualizing of taste, And
yeah, with me was like with a tinge of just judgment.
yeah. And that's really frustrating, because I think, especially with family, you want to feel seen,
Yeah.
but I'm with you that you don't have to justify your taste to anyone.
Yeah. And like the point is that it's like niche transgressive film. And like I know that not everyone is going to like it or want to see it.
Yeah.
But I feel like I also shouldn't have to argue my sense of myself and who I am as a person. Like I'm still the same
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just movies I like to watch. The little things on my screen
Yeah.
that aren't actually happening.
Yeah. I'm thinking of all these things that I'm like, oh, I could say, but I'm like, most of the things that's coming immediately to mind are like justifications again, where it's like, no,
Yeah.
I think it's really powerful if we honestly end this episode just being like, hey, we enjoy this.
Yeah. And like that's kind of how exploitation films saved the industry.
Yeah.
Because like even though it's like this malign genre, everyone still went to watch these movies.
Yeah.
They were still beating out the big the big studio movies because people wanted to watch this nonsense.
Also, this is kind of a bit of a non sequitur, but I think it's important to know that Roger Corman and his friends smoked weed.
And like again, I don't think Roger Corman ever won any big awards. But when
Yeah.
he passed away, it was like this big we're losing recipes moment for the industry. Cause like that's just how impactful of a person he was. Like literally without him, we wouldn't have James Cameron or Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg.
Yeah. Well, I do have to get going.
Yeah.
But was there any other quotes or anything of the references that you brought? Or I feel like we ended up sharing a lot of just kind of our own thoughts this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the power of this weird little movie.
Yeah.
And again, the genre as a whole and camp, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of all about how things that are seemingly nonsense and just fun or weird or whatever will like very much elicit a very real response and very real conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love you. I love having these
Love you
conversations.
too. Yes. Anyways, watch the movie where they pretend a closet door is an actual apartment door.
Yeah. Yeah, it isn't real, right? It nothing in this.
When she rings the doorbell, she's just touching the edge. There is no doorbell.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Stop recording. Yeah, let's do that. I have been your co-host, Saffron Hefta-Gaub. You can follow me online everywhere at Gaub Hefta.
And I've been your other co-host, Fabiola. You can find me on Instagram at Fabi0LAHH and on Twitter at Fabiola_Liaño.
Our theme song that you're bobbing your head to right now is by Harrison Lurie.
Give us a rating on Spotify and a review on Apple.
Thank you to our patrons, Nicole Veneto, Jose Liano, and Pericles Sparrow. Please check our episode description for additional links and citations.
Thank you so much.